Welcome to Analyst Talk with Jason Elder. It's like coffee with an analyst, but there's no actual coffee. Each episode, we interviewed an expert in the field of law enforcement analysis to share their career-defining stories and to get their insights on the world. Please join us on recognizing and learning from these brilliant minds as we define the law enforcement analysis profession one episode at a time.
Thank you for joining me. I hope many aspects of your life are progressing. My name is Jason Elder, and today our guest has 19 years of experience working with law enforcement agencies from 4 different countries. He has security experience working on the 2006 Torino Winter Olympics, the 2010 FIFA World Cup in South Africa, and the 2014 Commonwealth Games in Scotland. He is an active member of the Italian team for security, terroristic issues, and management emergencies, also known as ITSTIME. He is currently the Senior Crime Analyst from Winston-Salem Police Department. Please welcome Giovanni Pisapia. Giovanni, how are we doing?
Good, thank you. And you?
All right, I am doing well. Thank you so much for being on the show. It was nice meeting you yesterday in the prep call. So I want to talk about security with you in this episode and major events and the analyst role when cities are hosting major events. I want to get into your experience with working with these major events and then segue into coming to the U.S. and becoming a crime analyst at Winston-Salem Police Department.
Absolutely.
Let's just go back in time to when you started your career and just guide us through how you got started, how you discovered law enforcement.
Yes, I've always been interested in crime and criminology and criminological theories. So I studied that during university, and I wrote a thesis on violent crime. Thanks to the thesis, I started to ask documentation, and there's a library in Italy managed by one of the UN agencies called UNICRI, which is the United Nations Interregional Crime and Justice Research Institute, where I used to collect some books. And after being graduated, they offered me a position as an intern for one of their projects. They deal mainly on crime prevention and administration of justice. They do a lot of training for law enforcement agencies, but I also manage big international cooperation projects on crime-related issues. And so I started to work with them on various projects, and I found it very interesting. However, these projects were very high level, and I felt that I really wanted to see what was happening on the ground. And one of the projects that I got involved with during my time at the UN was the cooperation between law enforcement agencies on security during major sport events, which is a very interesting subject because it's difficult for police to share information, both within a country, but think internationally. And especially with regards to the best practice on security during major events. And because these events travel from one country to the other, there's a huge experience that a police department develops. And the aim of the project was to link up all these law enforcement agencies so that these best practices and lessons learned were shared between the previous host of a major sport event, could be an Olympic game, to the next one. Through this, I got a job in Torino for the 2006 Winter Olympic Games. And I got a job with the security department, and my role was to coordinate the security between the local organizing committee, which was responsible of the venues, and the law enforcement agencies who were ultimately responsible for the entire safety and security for the event. And there is where I started to, really see the depth of how to plan complex security operations within an urban environment. And there is where I really had a sense of, I really started to appreciate the spatial context of security, which occurs in a specific environment. And my task was to share the information related to the security from these two sides, the law enforcement agencies and the local organizing committee. And when I say law enforcement agency, it's not just the local law enforcement agency, it's also the national, but also international, because in these sport events, there's a big component of international aspect of security. So, for example, the US Secret Service is part and parcel of the whole planning. And that gave me a really good idea on the security planning of these specific measures to counter risk for the event spectators, for the event athletes, for the workforce, etc.
So Giovanni, during this time, are you working still for the UN, or are you actually working with the IOC?
Yeah, no, at that point I quitted the UN job and I joined the local organizing committee, LOC, for the security planning. So I went from a very high level job where projects were very distant from the ground, distant from what was actually happening on the ground, to a job which was very pragmatic, was very hands-on, was really to get stuff done on the ground. And I really appreciated having the opportunity to see also the side of crime prevention and security measures.
Okay. During this time, what are some issues that you're dealing with? What were some lessons learned that you discovered working these Olympic Games?
Well, this is something that I carry over with my experience with the other places that I worked on. It was working on these complex security plans. You have so many role players, and you have so many role players, both from the government side, so all the role players from the local government, but also at national, but also the entire city and the residents and the business. And the reason is that each and every security measure, could be a road closure, could be the deployment of hostile vehicle mitigation barriers, has an impact on the community. And what I found it really fascinating was the actual impact of security measures into other stakeholders of the event, which are very important. For example, the residents or the business owners, but all the contractors working for the Olympics, for example, bringing in food and all the transportation sector, moving athletes or spectators from one side to the other. And I really had an appreciation of all these role players working on a single event. And my role was really to ensure that these plans were shared. And that is where I think I really appreciated the importance of spatial data, because spatial data was the only one which was linking all these different role players. While in Torino, and how this is done usually is done through Word documents, PowerPoint presentation, where these security measures are being shared with various role players at the time. And there is where I found that there was something missing. At that stage, I couldn't understand yet what was missing in ensuring that information, special information on the event, could be shared seamlessly between various partners. And I think this is the lesson that I carried over into my second event, which was the 2010 FIFA World Cup in South Africa. And in South Africa, while in Torino I was working for the local organizing committee, and the committee is responsible for the venues. In South Africa, I was working actually for the Johannesburg Metropolitan Police Department, who were in charge of the security in cooperation with the South African Police Service of the entire city. So it was a different task, was to ensure that security was adhered to in the city, in the urban areas, not so much, not for myself on the events. There was somebody else looking for the actual venues. And that is where I started to use the GIS technology.
Oh, so then when you were dealing with the 2006 Olympic Games, the spatial data, the GIS data is limited at that time. So you were mentioning going off of Word and PowerPoint presentations. So there's a very limited use of GIS data during those Olympic Games. And then once you get into the World Cup, that's when you start to develop more GIS type tasks. Is that correct?
Absolutely. And this is one of an innovative approach to how to planned security measures, probably similar to the innovative approach that many police departments had in the States when GIS mapping was implemented. Before, people were putting little sticks on maps and pinpoints on maps. And I was able to live that transition through the event in the event sector for security planning. So from having PowerPoints presentation and Word documents of very detailed, documents on security plans to going into a integrated platform through the GIS technology.
So when you're dealing with security and GIS, I mean, I'm thinking about it's more than what just goes on in roads and maybe addresses. Are you also getting into more in terms of the makeup of the building, wanting to know information about entrances and exits of particular buildings as well, built into this GIS system?
Yes. So what I found out during these events is that because you have so many role players, each and everyone has his own we call it version of the truth. Each and everyone was working, for example, on the transportation plan of the city, while the law enforcement agencies were working on the security of the same city, and sometimes these two information were not integrated. And so with the GIS system, especially with the security of the urban area around those venues, what we started to look at was, for example, the security of traffic-free zones around venues, of no parking zones, of the venue security rings, so of the island sides of this venue which are secured, which through concentric rings, of road closures, of vehicle permit checkpoints, of, as you mentioned, temporary overlay. So, for example, tents that are being erected for hospitality next to a stadium. And especially then the deployment of all the personnel. So if we have the deployment of private security, of spectator service security, and of law enforcement agencies, that was the big task, to ensure that we were all together in one plan, so there were no overlaps, there were no unnecessarily deployment of people that could have been duplicated. And clearly, yes, this included all the security plans for specific areas. So, for example, security plans for the hotels, where the entrance of the route, the athletes route, the logistic route, the transport route for the workforce were included. And this spatial data then was drafted, was captured, and then was shared with all the role players, so that each and every one of them had a similar spatial information to work on their specific plan.
So this seems like a lot of data. I mean, how many different data sets are we talking about here, just roughly? Because I'm thinking you have your standard ones that are going to always be there, like what you've mentioned with roads or the buildings, or maybe even some of the checkpoint locations that they would normally do. But then you have the temporary structures that you talked about, tents, maybe a space that's not normally used every day, but is used for this event. Normally in GIS, I always think of in terms of all the different layers of data that are stacked on top of one another, and each one is a different data set. So just give us an idea of the amount of data, maybe the number of layers that we're talking about theoretically.
Yeah, during these events, there's always a department called overlay, and they are in charge of actually building the venues. So, and they're in charge of implementing all the physical temporary structures that need to be put in place for the event. So, for example, could be fence, could be the mag and bags, could be the tents for the mag and bags, could be the generators, etc. So, and they usually work with CAD. So what we did in Glasgow, because this was an evolution of this approach on implementing GIS technology for events. What we did was in Glasgow was to convert all the CAD layers into GIS files. So we had all the overlay that the architects were working on GIS file. And on that, we were plotting all the security features for the event of the entire urban area. As I mentioned, a big chunk of it is the transports, all the routes and all the protection of the routes, is the logistics, all the warehouses and the various point where all materials are being screened. But I'll give you an example. In these events where there's a high risk of something going wrong, through a risk assessment project, road closures are being identified. And we were able, with the GIS technology, to send a letter home to each and every resident affected by these road closures, and providing them, for example, with a vehicle access parking and permit. So it really went into the detail of the plan for an urban area and how to secure an urban area spatially, while a lot of things are happening at the same time, because these events like the Olympic Games, but also the FIFA World Cup, you have multiple venues occurring at the same time in a long time frame, with a lot of groups moving around the venues. Could be the spectators, could be the workforce, could be the VIPs, etc. So with all this requirement and all this complexity, we really had to ensure that the spatial data was correct and was unified. And the aim of it was to provide a single operational picture of the event. And by providing this, clearly this then linked to crime analysis.
So for the World Cup, you developed certain crime prevention strategies. Can you talk about a little bit about these crime prevention strategies and talk about stuff that really worked well, and if there's anything that didn't work as well as you thought it was going to?
Yes. Now, when working, and this occurs especially in South Africa, in the city of Johannesburg, so working on the event, clearly it resonated a lot, working on the spatial and the temporal characteristic of the security planning. And once the spatial requirements were somehow understood, we really focused on the strategy. And the strategy was informed on the analysis of crime. And this is where everything is coming together. Because once we put all the various security features of the event, and then we add the crime mapping onto it, then we can really see what are the problematic areas. And so I think from a crime prevention perspective, we work on two main focus areas. One was a very policing approach, which was, for example, hotspot policing, which was roadblocks to ensure that the risk was limited in some areas, for example, where our spectators were planned to be. And the other one was a big project with the Johannesburg Development Agency of the urban regeneration. So we looked at these areas where crime was concentrated. Part and parcel of the security of the event was to have urban regeneration project, which could be street lighting, could be upgrade of urban parks, could be upgrade of abandoned buildings or vacant houses, or upgrade of not maintained areas, which through the analysis were creating a crime issue. And so we really looked at a more short-term resolution and a long resolution of the various issues.
Okay. So then as you're reviewing the crime stats that are going on during this event, and this is specific to the World Cup, what crimes are spiking, and was there any crimes spiking that you didn't anticipate?
Well, one thing that makes this job so interesting is the fact that there's no place like, one another. And each and every place, each and every context has some different characteristics. So doing the security plan in Turin is different from doing it in Johannesburg, and is different from doing it in Glasgow. One of the issues, for example, in Johannesburg is areas where there's a high number of violent crimes. And this occurred before the event. And so what we did was really to pull all this data for the event, pull all the crime maps, plan the event according to the crime. So if we knew that there were crime hotspots, we are trying to tweak, some of the routes, for example. So the actual event was informed by the crime situation. This is one of the aspects so important, the decision making. So the actual crime actually informs decision makers when they plan the security, the event. But what we noticed is that through the event and through everything that was done, there was a consistent decrease of crime throughout this area. So we were really implementing the SARA process. So we were analyzing, we were scanning the area, analyzing it. We providing a response, and we were doing an assessment. And we saw that there was a consistent reduction of crime before, and especially during and after the event.
Okay, so all these people coming in to Johannesburg all at once for the World Cup, and crime goes down. So it's not a concept of more people, more problems. It's more people, less problems?
Yes, absolutely. And I think you really found a very interesting point. The fact that because of fear of crime, because of various variables, public spaces were not really utilized in Johannesburg. And we saw that during the event, the influence of people being outside, walking from place to place, being downtown Johannesburg, really helped in reducing crime. There were many more eyes on the streets, and I think it really changed the attitude of people experiencing the city. Clearly, there was a lot of focus from law enforcement agencies to ensure that the place was secure, and this is part of the plan. But also the fact that there were so many people, and just it was not anymore feasible really to some of the most troubling crimes, for example, street robberies, to occur. And clearly some of the measures that we did with regards to the environment, the urban regeneration, the urban upgrade helped tremendously in this.
Okay, let's move on then to the Commonwealth Games. So now you got two big events under your belt. What were some of the things that you brought in to the Commonwealth Games, and what did you learn from the Commonwealth Games?
Yeah, after the experience in South Africa, I went to Glasgow to work on the Commonwealth Games. For that event, I was responsible for the security of the road events, for example, the marathon. So these all events are happening outside venues, within the urban environment, with the urban context. And I remember going into the organizing committee and saying, okay, guys, we need GIS. And, there was a lot of pushback at the time. I was very fortunate that my former supervisor was very supportive of implementing GIS. I was responsible for the security of the road events and transport. So all the security practically of what's happening throughout the city with operations for the event. And I really needed to work together with various role players, both at local government, but also at national government, and also other various stakeholders like the sport federations. And because the road events, for example, the road bike, were occurring in various municipalities, I had to link all these local governments together so that actually we know what the route is and where the barriers need to be placed and where the people need to be deployed, etc. It was a fascinating experience. And what we did, well, when I entered, I really understood there were multiple versions of the truth. And I don't think it's not nobody's fault, is that we tend to work in silos in our own organization. And when you have a shared project, and this is where probably somebody goes off a tangent and develop their own plans. And so we saw that there was a various version of the truth. There was some data entry mistakes because it's normal. I send the PDF out and people might not be entirely clear. There was no availability to look at recent spatial data for decision making, for example, for manpower. It was difficult to share spatial data, usually shared through emails, through various documents. And there was no capability to store the spatial data also historically. So how did we get to this point? What were the phases that we got to this point? And so this is where I said, guys, we really need to develop some GIS capability. And I was supported by many people, and we were able to do it. And we did it especially with regards to security and transport, which really were the two sectors that really benefited a lot from implementing the GIS technology for the event.
Okay.
And one of the things that was of very interest for me was the whole also use of GIS technology for risk assessment. So Police Scotland had a very stringent risk assessment called the CRAM on to identify the risk in a scientific way. So in a quantitative way to ensure that the risk was clearly defined and all the security countermeasures were stemming out from such risk. And what we did was also to support with all the use of GIS technology. For example, the GIS technology to plan the hostile vehicle mitigation, the GIS technology to plan where the high spectators areas were going to be, the transport infrastructure like hub and park and rides and routes, etc., and emergency routes. So it was also there very interesting. And I think what then the law enforcement agencies and the organizing committee came together in the project was the deployment of personnel for these events. And because the personnel were coming from different agencies, the private security, local organizing committee, also law enforcement agencies, various branches, were able to pull everything together. And we used at the time ArcGIS Online, which was very helpful to share all this information to the various partners.
I'm just curious, with GIS, are you sticking to 2 dimensions or are you going to 3 dimensions?
Yeah, no, at that time we were very fortunate to be able to do the 2 dimensions.
Yeah.
So we used the GIS, we used the ArcGIS Online. These were static maps. Mm-hmm. We didn't include the actual movements of vehicles, but through these static maps, it was a very good baseline to work on the solutions then on the ground. On, for example, when the athletes via bus was coming in, or when the logistics truck had to enter the venue. So they really provided some very good base map for everybody to work on at the same time.
All right. Was there any lessons learned from your time working on the Commonwealth Games?
Yeah, absolutely. The fact that the use of GIS technology and also the use of crime analysis and crime mapping clearly allows for much better planning, increased efficiency. So the efficiency of, not having duplications of the ground of personnel, improving communication between people, because we know exactly that, for example, officer XY will work with private security personnel, and in those 2 at the specific venues, and those were the tasks at that specific area. We were able to record all this information consistently, and we were able to manage all the operational geographically. So really the spatial information and also the temporal one was of great importance to deliver the event in an effective way.
So what is your advice for analysts who may be having a major event coming up? We just had the Super Bowl for the NFL. What advice would you have for analysts as they're trying to prepare for that event?
Well, clearly, one of the characteristics of these major sport events is the vast amount of partners, vast amount of role players. And because you have all these role players, there must be a single operational picture of the event. And because the event requires so many iterations and changes because of variables that do change, for example, the number of spectators, the number of athletes. So these plans continuously evolve, and to ensure that everybody's working on a single picture, the use of GIS technology and the ability to share this information, spatial information, to everybody seamlessly is of great importance. So clearly there's a role for crime analysts on this. And for crime analysts, there's a huge role for the decision makers on saying, hey guys, on this event, I'm picking up this kind of problems. Could be robberies, could be burglaries, could be motor vehicle theft. You don't want the spectators to go and watch an event and don't find their vehicle on the way back home, right?
Yes.
So these problems, usually because crime is concentrated within urban areas, we can start to work on these issues before the event takes place proactively. And so the crime analysis is the one that needs to raise his or her hand saying, hey, I detected this problem near this venue where, for example, there will be a park and ride. And so that police can look at the matter proactively in conjunction with the various other role players, the city and the event organizer. This is for sure part one. And part two is the whole risk assessment. This is a very important concept, the whole risk assessment of the event. What is the risk of having an hostile vehicle against the event? What is the risk of having an adversary coming, impacting on the event? And these risks clearly has consequences and have related security measures that need to be fit in. And if we also have a GIS approach to these risks, then also the deployment of whatever security measure, could be deployment, could be hostile vehicle mitigation, road closures, no parking, then these do fit together. So the risk and the actual security measure, they seamlessly come together to deliver a safe and secure event.
I can also see intelligence analysis playing a role in this event as well. So not just crime analysis when you're looking at data and crime that may occur during this event, but intelligence in terms of the major players or any other events that might be occurring at the same time as the major event. So I could see all three working together. You got your security analysis, you got your crime analysis, and you got your intelligence analysis.
Yes. And for example, one of the greatest best practices would be to have repeated meetings before the event, because things change and situations change and information changes between the actual people in charge of the operations and the analyst, the intelligence analyst, the crime analyst, just to see that what are the issues that they are picking up, and if we are actually looking at these issues proactively instead of reactively.
All right. Well, very good. Well, let's take a break. When we come back, I want to talk about your work with ITSTIME, and I also want to talk to your migration to the States. You're listening to Analysts Talk with Jason Elder. We'll be right back.
Hi, this is Paul Arnold, and I just want to tell you the difference between the fast lane and the passing lane is that you're supposed to be passing in the far left passing lane. Even if you think you're going fast enough, get out of the lane.
Hi, this is Jason Elder from LEA Podcasts. I am proud to announce a new law enforcement analysis podcast, ACIA New Horizons Podcast from the UK. Will be hosted by Paige Kenningale. Paige, how we doing?
I'm very well, Jason. How are you?
Very well. Well, welcome aboard. Tell our audience a little bit about ACIA.
Sure. Okay, so ACIA is an association of crime and intelligence analysts, and it's a community of members from the UK and Ireland, and we encourage all our members to challenge how and why things are done within the intelligence sector.
So what is this podcast going to be about?
So it's going to be topic-based. So we will be speaking with individuals with diverse backgrounds who all work within the intelligence field. It's to provide a support network to improve analyst developments and to create sort of a critical mass to help implement change.
When is this podcast going to be published?
The podcast will be published the first Thursday of every month.
So you will be able to find the ACIA New Horizons podcast on our website. That is www.leapodcasts.com or wherever you get your podcast. And then Paige, one last question. What are your words to the world?
Be open-minded and allow me to network and promote the profession.
Welcome back, Giovanni. I want to talk about ITSTIME, which is the Italian team for security, terroristic issues, and management agencies. So just for those that aren't familiar with ITSTIME, generally talk about its purpose, the goals, and what it actually does.
Yes, so ITSTIME, it's a group of friends. It's a research group based with one of the universities in Milano. It's actually the university where my university tutor is based. So that's where I met him and I worked with him on my thesis, which was on risk assessment for critical infrastructure. And through this thesis that I developed, we became friends, and he set up a group of people, experts in various fields, always related to security, crime prevention, and emergencies. And so that I found it a very interesting place to share some of my, my knowledge, very on the ground knowledge with, for example, with students. At the time, I was doing some seminars with the university on the security planning of the things that we've discussed so far. And it also gave me a platform to publish some of my experience in journals, in articles. It's a good activity, and I do it on the side. And it's always good to keep abreast of issues, of challenges, which clearly are similar in various countries and various contexts. So there's a big link between, what I do and crime analysis, and also how to look at it in a more theoretical way.
Yeah. So is this the work that's being published? Is this just related to Italy, or is this worldwide?
It is worldwide. The team was created in Milano, but the work is worldwide. And I wrote a few things on, the planning. How do you plan the security measures for major sport events? How do you plan the transport security? How do you use GIS technology? And I think these are very practical articles on. There's a theoretical, of course, background to it, but there's also some practicality, so that somebody sitting now in a local organizing committee can take the article and say, oh, well, actually, this could be a good idea. Maybe I'm going to implement it. And so maybe they have a actual impact on in reality on the ground.
We'll put a link in the show notes for ITSTIME and some of your articles.
Thank you.
So let's get into you coming to the U.S. What was the thinking behind coming to the U.S. and talk about your migration over?
Yeah, it wasn't planned. My wife is American, and she studied architecture in Milano. She always liked architecture, and she thought that, studying in Italy with all these very old buildings and all the history of the Roman Empire and etc., and all the churches. And so she got into some project with renovating a church, and so she studied in Milano architecture. We met there. We were traveling, and then for family reasons, she had to come back to the States. And it wasn't part of the plan. It came a little bit out of the blue, but hey, sometimes in life you have to start from the scratch, start from beginning. Mm-hmm. So we moved to the States. Everything went very, very well, and everybody was very supportive at the Consulate General in Naples, the U.S. Consulate General. So it went very well for me to come here first with a green card, and now I'm also a U.S. citizen. So it was a very good trip. A good trip, a very challenging as you think, you leave everything behind, but at the same time you're starting afresh. So, and clearly America from outside, I can say from Italy, is looked in a very positive way. So USA clearly, because of various reasons, is, sometimes is the symbol of virtues. And this is something that probably might not be felt so much here, but US is really seen as a superpower. And it's in Italy in general, US is very loved. And there's a huge, strong relationship between Italy and the USA in both of tourism and people that moved from Italy here back in the days. So, and once you get to the US, you realize that how different is this country, how vast it is, but how difficult it is also to generalize. You cannot really talk about the US in general terms, because New York City is very different from Winston-Salem, which is different from other states in Wyoming, other cities in Wyoming. So it's a very diverse country. And clearly the US has a huge influence all over the world. What happens in the US is immediately informed, around. Sometimes my father calls me and say, hey, I heard that it's snowing in New York City. All right. Yeah, they show it on the news. All right. Okay. So it has, from simple things to most complex and serious matters, US has a incredible influence throughout the world. And then you get to know, you get to appreciate some of the good things of the US. For example, the practicality. So Americans are very practical people. I think there's a much more, at least in the southern European countries, there's a lot of more formality sometimes, and also bureaucracy in working environment. So here there's the characteristic of being practical, also informal. People are very informal, and also the dress, people do dress, informally. So
actually, it's funny that you mentioned that, because I was talking with a guy from Italy, and we got to talking about this concept where he's from, and it's going to escape me what town in Italy he's from. But we were commenting on the different ways people were dressed out in public in the United States. And he made the comment, like in his town, you would never be dressed down in public. You were almost in your best every time that you leave the house in terms of his town. I don't know if that's generally for all Italy, or it just happened to be the way it was in his particular community.
Yeah, it is general. It's more pronounced in areas, various cities. For example, Milano, it's the fashion capital where Giorgio Armani, Valentino.
Mm-hmm.
So especially in some cities, big cities like Milano, but also others, yes, it's very important the way you dress. And instead here, you see a practicality that lacks in Italy. So I wish there were, a middle point where you can find the two aspects, which are important in life. But but you said yes, what he said was correct.
Yeah, so don't wear pajama pants to Walmart, but at the same time, you don't need to be in a 3-piece suit to go to Walmart either. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, absolutely. Sometimes I go down the supermarket, I just grab whatever I have, and yeah, so it's a different concept of life. And one of the greatest thing also that I see here is the sport facilities, facilities to do sport. I like to swim, and in Winston-Salem there's so many swimming pools, and the YMCA is such a great organization, and there's team where you can practice whatever sport you're in, and I think the importance of sport and having an active life is also one of the greatest characteristics of the US.
Okay. Well, let's get into your work with Winston-Salem. And so you started as a crime analyst. As you come into this, you have all this years of experience working with major events, working security analysis. What helped you transition with all that event planning and crime prevention? What has helped you be successful with your job at Winston-Salem?
Well, I've always been interested in the actual analysis of crime. Now, let's go back 1 second in my experience in other places, for example, also in South Africa, where we had a very little team to analyze crime, but we had to, for example, geocode all the crime, and we had to clean all the data. So I had that experience of cleaning data and being here and clicking on the computer, opening ArcGIS map or whatever software you use, and being able to see all the various incidents. I thought it was absolutely wonderful. One of the things, however, that I took for granted, I really took for granted, it was a great eye-opener for me, was the complexity of the crime data. So the complexity of the RMS system, the complexity of the CAD system. So if somebody is interested in this profession, clearly this is something that needs to be acknowledged. So how you actually extract data and ensuring that data is correct. And because these systems were created before crime analysis, were created because of investigative reasons, were created because of other police work. Crime analysis, yes, it's an add-on, but these systems were not initially created for that. So how do you use, the software to measure crime, and the fact that each and every police department has different softwares. This is something that took it a little bit for granted. It was pretty easy back in the days to, hey, can you give me all this data? So I was on the other side of the fence. And now looking, I really have to congratulate the work that the crime analysts are doing. And sometimes it's not really being said sufficiently about data, about collecting data for everybody working on the field, for researchers, for local government, for people for grant. They called me a couple of days ago, somebody pulling a grant, trying to put together a grant for crime prevention in Winston-Salem, and they needed data to justify, why they need this money. And without data, it would be impossible, this work. So it's really acknowledging that without the work of having data making data available, many things would not be feasible. I'm still working on it. It takes a while, and you need to be very patient and to learn all the system and the softwares and the table. And there's always something new, and things continuously evolve because policing is an evolving business.
Yeah, I think this is the idea of data management, right? Because you don't want to be spending your day managing data or even doing data entry for that matter, right? You want to limit that. As an analyst, you want to have all the data that you're going to need at your disposal to quickly get through these data requests so then you can get to your projects of analysis. And I think in law enforcement, in too many ways, I should say, there's scenarios where the data is not in a database somewhere. And that can be very draining to the analysts trying to get the necessary data in a format to then be dispersed.
Yeah, the idea, absolutely. Ideally, the analysts would move into more, supporting operational decision-making on how to reduce crime in a specific area, how to problem solve an issue. That is the ideal solution. And I think some people have reached that goal. They're going much more towards that aim of really being an analyst. Some people are still working through that, but yes, absolutely, as you said, that would be the ultimate aim.
Yeah. And I just thought of something too. Another aspect to the job is getting access to the data. I remember trying to get access to parole and probation data and fighting to get that because I was from the police department and the corrections side did not want to give access to us. So that was a struggle, just trying to get access to certain data that I felt was key to do my job.
Yeah, clearly, yes. Yes, that's one of the challenges of ensuring that data is made available and also is made available in a workable way, because a Word document with a lot of addresses might not be very easy to geocode, might not be very easy to work on. So it also how the data is being recorded and how is it shared.
We just talked about a little bit about complexity of data and the different levels of data and various sources of data. But you also come from a situation where the department or the team that you work for is centralized. Whereas coming over to the United States here, as you probably realized quite quickly, is that our law enforcement system is decentralized. There's 18,000 different police departments in the US, whereas in Italy, there's one law enforcement entity. So I guess how big of an adjustment has that been, the decentralization of law enforcement as you've come into the US?
Yeah, that's something that probably is not, I knew it, but I never understood the extent of the decentralization on the US. And I think until you see it, you just don't realize it. And the truth is, the countries, that I've experienced with, Italy, South Africa, but also others, are very centralized country. There's a big centralized government. And for law enforcement, there's a couple of central police departments where all the decisions, or anyhow, the most important decisions are taken in the capital, in the headquarters of the capital, which could be very far away from local places and local towns throughout the country. Of course, I'm simplifying, but the fact that federalism was such an important part of the American government system and how it is done, and clearly this has an impact on policing. What I see is that, as everything in life, there's pros and cons. From a more centralized area, clearly there might be some cost efficiency. So, for example, if we have one training center throughout the entire country, well, clearly there might be some cost efficiency of imparting training in uniformity of policies, having training done in one area, having software, the same software. Everybody has the same RMS system. So,
that's a wild idea.
which actually is the one that is in place in all the other countries, because yes, they do have a centralized police force, and then they have police stations, but all the police stations adhere to the same policies and procedures, which are emanated from the central headquarters. And so when they buy the software, they buy one software for everybody. And when they change it, it changes for everybody. And so there's some pros in this. For example, having policies which are adhered by everybody. But the other side, the cons, is that generally the people, the decision makers in the headquarters are very far away from the people. So some of the decisions might not work. Some of the decisions might not be the most effective ones. Some of the decisions might be taken for other reasons. Could be there's all sorts of reasons why actually decisions are being made. And one of the big difference that we analysts have to acknowledge is that data, crime data, is not available in many countries. For example, Italy, but also South Africa. It's available only at high-level country. So disaggregated data is not made available to the public. And clearly this hampers a lot of efforts in trying to do in a lot of projects in getting your cities safer, in trying to find solutions. So the availability of data in the US, where some police departments have crime mapping capabilities, or you can phone in and ask for call for service at a specific address, websites, or calling in and asking how many robberies and etc. It's unprecedented for me. And that is also part of the crime analyst job that is not being fully appreciated by the fact that they are the ones then they provide usually all this data for a lot of users. But at the same time, there's also a fragmentation because, criminals don't know boundaries. And so sometimes what a police department is working for a crime pattern, which is occurring in the nearby police jurisdiction, and how these are being shared, usually is shared through networking, shared through personal knowledge of the analyst. But if I don't know the analyst, well, I might not drop him or her an email. So it's really important to network. It's really important to get to know who are the others so that information can be shared without problems.
It's interesting. I had a lady, Danelle DiGiozio, on the show a couple months back, and she worked on a serial rape investigation. And the rapist actually said that he purposefully went to different jurisdictions because he believed that the different police departments didn't talk to one another. So it's an interesting concept of, not talk to one another because you have this defragmentation, as you mentioned. But at the same time, with all these local jurisdictions, the police department are more responsive to local concerns, right?
Yes, the fact that a resident can call the chief of police and express, their concerns. And I think it's a great thing. As we said a little bit before, this practicality and the absence of formality, it really goes a long way to bridge the gap between police and the community, to make it cohesive so that we are all working together for safer neighborhoods and so for a safer city. That goes a long way to ensure that, cities are safer.
So you've been a crime analyst for 3 years, but I see that you've taken in these 3 years, you've taken some pretty interesting courses. So I wanted to get your viewpoint on some of these courses that you've taken. You've taken the Alpha Group's Criminal Intelligence and Analysis training, and you've also taken IACA's Fundamental of Crime Analysis and the Essential Skills. Which one of those sticks out to you? Which one do you highly recommend? What are your general thoughts on some of these courses? Because these are the two big ones that a lot of analysts have taken besides IALIA's FIAT program.
I think what makes a course successful is the person who's actually imparting it. For example, Christopher Bruce did a course funded by the Department of Justice in Concord, I remember. And I remember reaching out to him and saying, hey, can I come? And they said, yeah, of course. And that's what really, that's something unbelievable, because they gave me the opportunity to meet some other analysts still when I was not an analyst. And that's, if somebody interested into this position is, yes, please try to get to know other analysts in whatever way you can, because it will really open up and understand better what the job is all about. And I really enjoyed Christopher Bruce teaching. He has a huge experience, but also enjoyed Eric Pisa. He's one of the assistant professor at John Jay College in New York City. And with him, I attended a course on crime mapping. I really enjoyed the way he taught it, and also the articles he's been writing. And part of crime analysis is the fact that many people have moved into the academics, but really not from a theoretical perspective, but more, they call it from a pracademic. So it's very practical academic. So it's very practically focused on how to actually bring down the crime in specific areas using, for example, various theories like environmental criminology. So that also I enjoyed a lot the courses by IACA, by Jessica LeBlanc. She was a great teacher, and I remember taking these courses back in Italy. So I was doing everything remotely. So also these courses open up the crime analysis world in Italy, and it has an impact. It has an impact on what's happening outside of the US. Let me give you an example. One of the students in Italy that we attended the same course on crime analysis, he opened up a company to share data on crime in Italy. And because the data on crime in Italy is not being provided by the police, they have created a software to pull data from newspapers, from public platforms, etc. So that some of the data is finally available to security managers, to businesses, etc. And so there's an impact on these courses, actually, on what's happening also outside the US.
What's the name of the company?
It's Mind Crime, and they have developed an app where they geocode all crimes that are occurring. And what they said is that on various crimes, they have a very good percentage of the actual criminals occurring in the city. So, and sometimes could even more, it could be of great use for various professions, even for local government. One of the other things that I also enjoyed a lot is Stephen Gottlieb for the Alpha Group and his course on crime analysis. I thought it was very interesting, the whole course, and we had to buy a calculator, and I didn't know how to use it, and I still don't know how to use it. I need to pick it up again, but I thought that was really interesting, because these are really the people that saw this profession evolve in the States from back in the days. Mm-hmm. And of course, there's two professors that have enlightened me in this job. And one is Herman Goldstein, the creator of problem-oriented policing. Great. I mean, that book is, and all things that he wrote is so interesting. And the other one is Ronald Clark, an English professor who taught in the US about situational crime prevention and the whole theory about the crime science instead of criminology. And I thought that it's of great importance for analysts to really have a grasp of that and try to read as much as they can, because that really supports whatever they're doing.
Excellent. All right. Well, I like to end the show with personal interests, and you are a master swimmer. What is your favorite swimming event?
Yeah, it's a butterfly. Yeah, a butterfly certainly, but probably because on the other ones I'm really not doing too well. Yeah, it's butterfly, and I find swimming is a great thing. Swimming, one of these sports that you learn during your youth, you take them with you everywhere you go throughout your entire life. So if whatever happens of destiny, you get thrown somewhere, and you need to find people, you need to find new friends and do new activities. Sport is really an activity that allows you to build a social network of people, of friends. And clearly for me, swimming has been the constant. Wherever I go, I find a group that swims, and I have great fun.
And you establish that connection, and as you said, meet new people, establish new relationships. Very good, very interesting. What distance do you usually go in terms of the butterfly?
Well, I think I usually do 50 meters. So it's 2 laps. Once I remember the coach came into the pool and say, guys, today we're going to do something different. You're going to pick up one of these 4 challenges, and you can leave the pool only when you finish one of these 4 challenges. And I don't know, one was like swimming 3,000 meters freestyle, and the other one was swimming with a chute, which is practically, it's a device to hold you while you swim. It's like a parachute, and you swim with this parachute, which makes really difficult. And the other one was to do 20 butterfly laps. And I tried the butterfly and it worked. So it worked at the time. So and I got out of the pool all in one piece. So yeah.
Very good. Well, my wife's a swimmer, but I am not. I can barely swim to save my life. And the one time I went with her to go swimming, and she's lapping. She's doing all these laps back and forth. And I am just struggling in the water just to finish one lap. Right. And she's like, all right, well, I still got some time. I want to do this. So she gives me just like this kicking board thing that all I'm just doing is holding the board, and all I'm supposed to do is kick my feet. And I'm still struggling. Don't have the breathing right. I'm huffing and puffing. And there's little kids that are lapping me. Like, it's just like 5 and 6 year olds just swimming right past me as they're lapping me going through there. And so it was kind of a really embarrassing moment, but it gave me a really appreciation for those that can swim. And to do 20 laps to me is just not something that I can see myself ever doing because I'm such a poor swimmer.
Yeah, I use it a lot, as a way to start the day. I think it's also habit. So, but I hope you can improve. And as everything in life, we can only improve, right?
Mm-hmm. You're right. If I keep work at it, you're right. All right, Giovanni, I have one last question for you before we get to words to the world. Italian food in the U.S. is really popular. What are your thoughts of Italian food here in the United States?
It depends. It depends. Clearly, there's some changes on how it is done. There's clearly some changes, but it's great to be able to go to the supermarket and to find Italian products like, the Parmigiano Reggiano, or I don't know, some of the oil or some of the ham that my kids really like. So I think it's a great opportunity for people to the US. So there's so many different types of cuisines, and you can really experience different types. But I think, once COVID will be a memory of the past, I think one advice that I have is to take a vacation and, go and experience it in the actual place. Is always great to know, new cultures and new ways of doing things. And so I think it's a great way also of, making our perspective of the world a bit broader. Yeah.
Yeah. So what I hear you saying is Olive Garden is horrible and that you only make your own here in the States and don't go to restaurants.
No, I do enjoy some, but clearly, there's some differences. Yeah. And one of the things that in Italy was pretty focused was the slow food movement. So the fact that, to eat food, you gotta take it easy, and you need to slow down, and you need to appreciate what you have. And also the fact that the food is also a way to congregate with people, and so it's the social element into food is very important. And so that is also something, the fact that food, yes, but it's also the culture that comes with it.
Well, our last segment to the show is Words to the World, and this is where I give the guest the last word, and you can promote any idea that you want to. Giovanni, what are your words to the world?
Yeah, my words to the world is for students, for people that have studied criminology. There's a big difference between the traditional criminology and what we in crime analysis are doing. In traditional criminology, it's really focused on understanding the criminal. It's really focused on the long-term social reforms, and it's really looking at the distance causes of crime, and it's very strong on sociology, etc. While what we do with crime analysis, which is linked with the crime science movement, is instead of understanding criminal, is to actually understand crime, is to understand the criminal event, is to try to find out the immediate causes of a crime and trying to find a reduction in an effective manner, is to look at the context, is to look at the environment. And instead of focusing on the why of crime, is to focus on the how of crime, of the modus operandi, of for burglaries, the points of entries, is on crime patterns, is on hotspots, and it's on problem-oriented policing. It's on specific criminal issues and also on disorder. So I think this big difference needs to be emphasized, because sometimes it could be misleading in the education system. And so I think the way that a crime analyst or looking at crime is of big importance, and I really hope everybody can look at the difference and appreciate what we're doing in the community to make it safer.
Very good. Well, I leave everybody with, you've given me just enough to talk bad about you later, but I do appreciate you being on the show, Giovanni. Thank you so much for being on the show, and you be safe.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you for joining us today on Analyst Talk with Jason Elder. We hope you not only enjoyed the show, but also learned something new. For more information on our guests and information relating to today's topic, please visit our website at leapodcast.com. Special thanks to the Rough and Tumble for our theme song. For more of their music, you can visit their website at theroughandtumble.com. Also thanks to Kyle McMullen for our show logo. For more of his design, please visit his website at moderntype.com. The show is hosted, recorded, and edited by Jason Elder and written by me, Mindy. You can contact us both via the LEA podcast website. Please join us again next time as we interview another expert in this great field.